Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Garrett and Steve with Executive Firearms, and first and foremost, we want to thank you so much for selecting us to train with. We look forward to having you out to the range, and with that being said, we need to get into something we call the safety brief. Now, the safety brief helps us work together to create a successful and safe learning environment. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. That's good. All right, so first things first, we're ready to go to a course, but we need to know what protective equipment we need before we hit the range. Well, it's pretty simple. The first thing we're going to want to deal with is eye protection, what we sometimes refer to as eye pro. Now, there's a multitude of different companies that make eye protection, some that are sunglasses, some that are clear. You just have to find what works for you. These ones right here are Magpul. Oakley also makes some. I mean, you can find them anywhere. You just need to make sure they're ballistic rated. The next thing we want to take a look at is protecting our ears, because gunshots can be loud and we want to keep our ears good to go. So these ones right here are electronic. You don't necessarily need anything as fancy as these. However, we do recommend them. You can also just get earplugs, anything that's going to dampen the sound and keep your hearing safe. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is basically just range appropriate clothing. The biggest one being closed-toed shoes. Brass is hot when it comes out of the gun, so we don't want it landing on your feet. You don't want to have a toe stub or anything like that. So closed-toed shoes are a must for our courses. All right, so we're going to talk about what I like to call the 4 fundamentals or principles of firearm safety. There's 4 rules that work in conjunction to create a safe system for you while you're out on the range. The first firearm safety rule we want to talk about is treating every firearm as if it's always loaded at all times. Now, this helps us generate a healthy respect for firearms from day one until we're the best shooter on the range. We want to always follow these rules and treat every firearm with the respect it deserves. This leads us into our next point, which is making sure we never point the firearm at anything we do not wish to destroy, shoot, or harm. This is going to come into play when you're working in a class environment. You have several people all around you. You're going to have to be very, very aware of where that firearm is pointed, making sure it's not pointed at you, the person next to you, or anything. Now, while you're in class, you are going to be learning things. So your brain is going to be jumping from one thing to the next as you're learning new stuff. You always need to be rooted in those safety rules and come back, make sure you're not pointing that firearm at anything you do not wish to destroy, shoot, or harm, because you're treating it as if it's loaded.
All right, so now we're going to discuss the third principle of firearm safety, and that has to do with our trigger finger. We're going to keep our trigger finger straight and off the trigger until our sights are on target and we've made the conscious decision to fire the weapon. How we can do that is by placing the index finger of our weapon hand along the slide or frame of the firearm. We don't want it down on the trigger guard because that encourages or that leads to the finger wanting to come into the trigger guard too soon, or sooner than we want to, or sooner than we've made the decision to, and that can lead to accidents. So we want to make sure we keep it straight off the trigger, again, until we've put our sights on target and we've made the conscious decision to fire the weapon. The fourth and final principle of firearm safety that we would like to go over with everybody is positively identifying your target, being aware of what's between you and the target, and also what is beyond that target. What that means for us as students or shooters at the range is that we need to make sure we identify the target that we're shooting. We need to make sure there is nothing, people or objects, between us and the target prior to making the shot on that target. And we also want to be aware of what's behind the target so that we can ensure that the round, as it passes through the target, impacts in a safe area, like the berm. We don't want the round going off anywhere else and possibly causing harm to somebody else. So again, positively identify your target, be aware of what's between you and the target, and what is beyond that target. All right, so now that we've gone over the 4 principles of firearm safety, now we'd like to get into some range instructions that you might hear when you come out to a course. This isn't to overwhelm you or to make you feel nervous in any way, but to kind of give you a heads up on some of the things you might hear and some of the verbiage that you might hear from us as instructors. At any point when you're out at the range with us, if you have a question or if you don't understand something, by all means ask. That's what we're here for. We want you guys to be comfortable and we want you to relax while you're out here. So once we've all made it to the firing line, one of the very first commands you'll hear will be eyes and ears. That is simply letting you know that at this time, it is time to put on your eye protection and your ear protection. So as the shooters get to the line, you just simply hear eyes and ears. at which time you will put your eye pro and your ear protection on. All right, so once we got on the firing line, we've got our eye protection and our ear protection on, we're then going to load the firearms. We're going to bring the firearm out of the holster in a safe direction, lock the slide to the rear, and we're going to grab the magazine. We're going to insert the magazine into the firearm, and we're going to let the slide go forward, loading the firearm. Notice how Garrett is standing, finger straightened off the trigger. He's standing by for further instruction at this point. While you're at our course, there are going to be several cases in which you need to unload and ensure that the firearm is safe. We're going to go over a couple different specific examples for you about this, but the process will be the same in each case. The first example would be if you're on the firing line and you hear cease fire. If you hear cease fire, that is the instruction for all shooters to immediately stop firing and to unload their weapon. Another example would be is if you have finished a drill and you need to holster up, you want to make sure that the weapon is in a safe and clear condition. How we're going to do that, the first step, we need to remove the magazine from the weapon, keeping the weapon pointed in a safe direction. Finger straighten off the trigger. Lock the slide to the rear will be the next step. You will observe the ejection of that round out of the firearm. From here, we can then go in checking chamber, the magazine well, and the slide face to ensure there's nothing still in the firearm. At which point, Garrett will then let the slide go forward. He will aim back out at his target, and he will press one well-aimed shot. Leaving the hammer to the rear, he will not re-rack the weapon, he will simply holster it at that time. This will ensure now that the weapon is in a safe condition and it is unloaded. You have physically and visually checked this so that you can ensure that you are safe for yourself and others on the range.
So another command you might hear while you're on the range is simply cease fire and holster. Now what this means is we don't need you to go through the actual process of clearing the round out of the chamber and making sure the firearm is 100% without a round in the chamber. We simply need you to come back and holster the firearm. Now there's a multitude of different reasons we might have you do this. It might be because we need to go fix a target and we simply don't want to make everyone clear their firearms out. It's much more time efficient. So if I'm giving this command, what it's going to look like is you're going to cease firing by removing your finger off the trigger. You're going to bring the firearm back to what we call a compressed area. And once you're done with that, you're going to visually inspect your holster, making sure it's free of obstructions or anything like that that could cause the firearm to unintentionally discharge. And then you're going to holster the firearm, making sure to keep your finger straight and aligned on the slide or frame of the pistol, just to keep it away from the trigger. So there's going to be times during the course where instructors are going to be forward of the line explaining things. Now it becomes very natural to say, oh, I want to try that while we're explaining something or wanting to pull the gun out and doing that. You absolutely cannot do that. We are downrange. You do not want to point the firearm at us or in our general direction. So please wait. We will give you time to practice and try it and feel what it's like. But at no time should a firearm come out of the holster while we're forward of the line. And on top of that, we'll give you the commands to remove the firearm. So if you have a special case where you need to remove the firearm for any reason, just make sure you talk to one of us, the instructors, and get permission to remove that from the holster and do whatever it is that you need to do. So the next big question a lot of people have is, when I show up to one of your courses, how do I handle my firearms? How do I get them from here to the firing line? Well, it's a good question, and there's a lot of mistakes that can happen. The biggest one we want to avoid is beginning of a class, a bunch of people bringing their guns out, and there's a bunch of guns and ammunition floating around, being handed around, being passed around. It's just not very safe. So when you get to one of our ranges, you open up your case. You're going to want to select whichever firearm you are using for that course. In this case, I have two firearms. I know I'm going to take a pistol course today. I'm going to go through the process of clearing this firearm. Now, I removed the source of the feed because I may have traveled with a magazine, whatever the case may be, and I lock the slide to the rear. I do my 3-point check. I'm aware that this firearm is good and clear. It's set. Now, one big mistake a lot of people make is they lose muzzle discipline when they're doing this. So in other words, they're not aware of where they're pointing the firearm. You want to make sure that you're pointing it in a safe direction. I drop the slide and we're not on the firing line, so I'm not going to dry fire and release the striker. That's the only difference between what I'm doing here versus when I'm on a firing line. Once I'm done here, it goes safely into my holster, still maintaining muzzle awareness, making sure that the other folks around me are not getting in front of my gun, and it stays in that holster until I'm given a command for loading, unloading, anything. It's going to stay in my holster. The safety principles that we've covered with you today will ensure that you have a safe and successful time with executive firearms while on the range. Whether it's a rifle or a handgun, it doesn't matter. If you follow the 4 principles of treating every firearm as if it's always loaded, never pointing the firearm at anything you do not wish to destroy, shoot, or harm, keeping your finger off the trigger until you are intentionally ready to discharge the firearm, and knowing your target and what's beyond, you'll have a fantastic time with us. Now, as time gets closer to your course, if you have any questions, please reach out to us at info@executive-firearms.com, and we'd be happy to answer any course questions, gear questions, or safety questions. And while with us on the range, please, if you have a question, ask one of the instructors. That's what we're here for. We're not going to bark at you. We want to create a safe learning environment for you. So we look forward to having you out to the course. From Steve and Garrett at Executive Firearms, educate, train, and perform.